Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Lord of the Rings review series. The last time we checked out the first major Lord of the Rings game after a string of attempts during the 80s and 90s. Vivendi's Fellowship of the Ring game released a year after the first film in Peter Jackson's trilogy, though it had no direct ties to the film thanks in part to a legal issue that only allowed them to use aspects from Tolkien's novel. EA owned the rights to adapt Jackson's trilogy into games, and they attempted to do so as early as February of 2000. Around this time, they attempted to get started on a game based on Fellowship of the Ring. New Line Cinema even sent them a copy of the script, concept art, and even some of the earliest trailers. However, by June of 2001, apparently they felt like a game solely based on the first film wasn't going to be ready in time, and decided to merge both Fellowship and the Two Towers into one game and release alongside the second film. Adding to the confusion was that this game released only a few weeks after Vivendi's Fellowship game, and no doubt that added to why that game was overshadowed. The EA game was developed by Stormfront Studios, who would later go on to make that terrible Aragon tie-in game. So since Vivendi's Fellowship game was a mediocre attempt with a lack of clear focus on what type of game it wanted to be, how does EA's attempt fare? The plot, as mentioned, covers the events of both Fellowship of the Ring and the Two Towers. The game uses clips ripped straight from the movie to tell the story, which actually does this cool transition from video clip to game footage, which to this day I still think is a really sick transition. To explain why we're playing through both movies, the game frames the plot as a narration in which Aragorn is telling Éowyn the events of the series up to the battle at Helm's Deep. The game's focus is on the characters of Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, which does limit which parts of the plot are given the most focus. Like most video game adaptations, when it comes to the story, it's recommended that you've seen the film first, since trying to piece together the plot here would be one hell of a challenge. The opening level starts at Weathertop, completely skipping all the intro stuff at Hobbiton. The game also leaves out spoilers in regards to the bigger moments of the Two Towers, which makes sense since the game was released a whole 2 months before the film even came out. Very few clips from the Two Towers make it into the game because of that very reason. The game is broken up into 12 levels, 3 from the first movie and 7 from the second. The Fellowship part of the game starts, like I said, at Weathertop, and then it's the road to Moria, a battle with the Watcher in the water, and finally the battle at Amon Hen. The Two Towers section starts with the level in Fangorn Forest, then 3 levels defending the villages and plains of Rohan, and the final 3 levels cover the battle at Helm's Deep. If you're wondering where the levels are covering Frodo and Sam's journey to Mordor, or Merry and Pippin's battle alongside the Ents, sadly they're not in this game due to the part of that focus on only playing as Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. Plot-wise, this is all pretty bare bones in spots, especially if you never saw the films. The Fellowship side of the plot gets a little bit more exposition and setup, most likely because that film had been out for a year and so they were able to use more footage from that one. The Two Towers side is vague at best and missing a ton of crucial plot elements. However, looking at the levels themselves, even with the plot being vague, the game does hit all the major playable moments you'd expect to be here. Also, since this is a movie-based game, at the end of the day I'm not expecting it to be the greatest retelling, so as long as you've seen the films, you'll be fine with how the story plays out. The gameplay though is by far the best part, and this is because EA picked the genre and stuck with it. The Vivendi's Fellowship game was a mess of ideas. It wanted to be an RPG where you pick up quests from NPCs, but then it wanted to be a stealth game with 0 stealth mechanics built into it, and then it wanted to just be a hack and slash game where leveling up and gaining experience was not even part of the equation, which led you to just running through enemies. I mean, like, pick a lane and stick with it, you know? EA's Two Tower game is a beat 'em up and it never deviates from that path. True, like I said in the other review, Lord of the Rings seems primed to be adapted to a simple turn-based RPG of sorts, but if you are trying to capture the style of the action scenes from the film, then a beat-em-up game would be the best way to go. Each level starts off where you choose your character, and then you run through mostly linear levels, taking down every orc, goblin, and urukai in your path. The 3 play the same in that they all have a primary weapon like a sword or an axe for close-up combat, in addition to having a ranged weapon such as a bow or a small throwing axe. You press X for quick light combos and triangle for heavy attacks. You can also parry attacks with the square button, and this is great for avoiding incoming arrows in addition to basic attacks coming at you. Standard enemies can be dispatched easily with the light combo, but shielded enemies require a bit more strategy. When dealing with shielding, you'll have to either start with light hits and end with a heavy combo, or combo all 3 heavy hits. This will break the shield and allow you to attack faster with the light combos. Constantly attacking fills up the combo meter on the side, and getting in enough hits quick and fast lets you enter perfect mode, where everyone drops in one hit. At the end of each level, you gain experience for how you performed and you level up. Each time you drop an enemy, you're graded on the kill, and the highest rating is perfect and the lowest is fair. Score better ratings and you gain more experience. You then use that experience to buy combos, extensions to your health, and stronger projectiles. So unlike the Fellowship of the Ring game, fighting has its advantages here and you'll never want to skip combat. Each level kind of plays out the same with a few mission objectives to take care of. For the most part, you just run through the level killing what you can, but later levels such as the ones at Rohan and Helm's Deep, they give you a little bit more to do than that. In Rohan, you'll have to save villagers from orcs under a time limit, and in Helm's Deep, you have to prevent the orcs from overrunning the wall, so you have to take out enemies while also kicking down ladders to stop them from coming back up. Most levels are short, taking maybe 10 to 15 minutes. However, there isn't a checkpoint system in place here, so dying to the end of a level means going back to the start. It can get a little frustrating in that regard. The game can also be a tad difficult, but it depends on how you're playing it. If you stick with one character for most of the playthrough, they'll be strong enough to take care of the enemies later in the game, and you'll also have access to better combos and more health. The only times that you'll fail is if you don't use combos enough to take care of the enemies fast enough, and fail the time-sensitive missions like the one in Rohan. Also, you really need to know how to block and parry. As much as you want to go crazy and button mash, it's better when you take your time and use blocking and combos to your advantage. However, the real difficulty will show up when you start switching from like a level 7 Aragorn to a level 1 Legolas. Like I said, at higher levels you've gained access to those new combos and health upgrades, but at level 1 you've got nothing. And so switching characters halfway through the playthrough isn't really ideal. And if for whatever reason the base game is too easy for you, there is an option to switch it in the menu to a hard mode, which is a nice touch. As for the boss fights, well, it's a tad underwhelming in that area. You get to fight against the Watcher in the Water, the Uruk-hai that killed Boromir and Amon-Hen, and finally the Warg that took Aragorn off that cliff. There's no Balrog fight here because sadly Gandalf isn't playable, and strangely there is no real final boss fight in the last level. I mean, to be honest though, there really wasn't a big enemy in the Battle of Helm's Deep. I mean, making somebody up might have been a decent idea, but that would have been stretching, and again, I don't know what the legality is for what EA is allowed to pull out of their ass from this kind of thing, because they can't use stuff from the book, so if it wasn't on film, I don't think they're allowed to do it. Instead, the last level at Helm's Deep is just an endurance round where you defeat orcs and you try to save Legolas and Gimli and protect the door to enter the full keep of Helm's Deep. To be honest, even looking at the source material, like I said, there wasn't a whole lot they could do here. Boss fights play out similar to regular combat in that you'll parry, then take your hits when you create an opening. There isn't much strategy here, but most likely that's due to the fact that these fights should hardly count as boss fights. Essentially, these are just enemies with health bars that you can see, and maybe they do a bit more damage than standard enemies. As for side content, there are unlockables for completing certain levels with specific characters, or reaching certain levels with them. It's actually pretty cool behind the scenes stuff of how they made the game, and I wish more games did stuff like this. Much like how the Lord of the Rings movies had hours of behind the scene footage, it's actually not too surprising that the game follows suit. I love this stuff more than concept art and images. There's also the Tower of Orthanc, in which you can take a character in to clear 20 floors of an endurance round. This side mission is okay, but it's totally underwhelming, as when you start, you see Saruman taunt you, and so you might naturally think that making it all the way up there grants you a boss fight with him. Instead, once you've beaten the 20 floors, you'll meet Saruman at the top of the tower, and then he'll strand your ass on the top before the game then just boots back to the menu. The only thing you get for completing the entire game is access to cheat codes. Man, remember when games used to do that? Damn, I miss cheat codes. Like, seriously, games used to have that all the time. And sometimes they were, like, built into the game, but then other times you have the code section in a GamePro magazine thing, and you type them in. That figures. Nowadays, cheat codes would be DLC, I guess. And finally, you can unlock Isildur as the bonus character, but he plays the same as Aragorn, and for the most part, it's hardly worth all that effort to get him. Honestly, I didn't even know there was a secret character until years after the game came out. They don't even clue you in that there is another character. Presentation is amazing in regards to how much has been replicated straight from the film. The graphics themselves are decent enough for this early PS2 game, with a few muddy textures, but overall it's solid. There are no real in-game cutscenes for the most part. The clips from the film cover most of the exposition. Aragorn's narration covers most of the important bits also. As I said earlier, don't use the game as a jumping in point. Watch the films first, then play the game. The few locations from the film are spot on, like Weathertop or Balin's Tomb. However, the rest of the levels that were created for the game look like they might as well have been taken from the film. The voice acting is great because they got all the main actors to reprise their roles, so Ian McKellen, Viggo Mortensen, Orlando Bloom, John Rhys Davies, Elijah Wood, they're all here. And it's not just archive audio, they say brand new lines. And in an awesome move, and one that pisses me off to no end for other games, is that they managed to get the rights to use the entirety of Howard Shore's awesome soundtrack. So you'll be attacking orcs when the main Fellowship theme comes blasting out, and it's awesome. It's like playing a scene straight out of the movie, and I get pissed off at this since I don't get how this game gets the official music, but like, say, the Harry Potter games, also from EA, waited until Game 5 to secure the main theme, and only that, and they were really proud of that. Seriously, there was behind-the-scenes interviews on the Order of the Phoenix game where they were like, yeah, we finally got the rights to use Hedwig's theme. I was like, but you guys own that, like, don't you? And yeah, I understand that the music probably isn't done yet when like the first Harry Potter games were released, but like you're telling me when you got to Chamber and Azkaban, you didn't have access to go back and grab the John Williams stuff? Like, seriously? I understand like with Lord of the Rings, the movies were filmed in advance, and so the scoring probably wasn't done until after the fact, and at that point, Fellowship of the Ring was out when this game came out, so clearly they have access to it, but come on, it's that extra effort. Overall, the Two Towers game is a solid movie tie-in, and honestly, compared to the Fellowship of the Ring game, oh boy, it's a flat-out masterpiece. It's a simple beat-em-up game, but at least it knows that and it plays to the strength of that for the duration. The game lasts maybe 3-4 hours to reach the credits, and maybe an hour or two more to gain all those upgrades and unlock all the bonus content. Even with the short length though, I've replayed this game constantly over the years. It was a blast to play when it came out, and it's held up pretty well even now close to 20 years later. It's always a pleasant surprise to find a solid movie tie-in. Though I think the big reason as to why this game succeeds in so many ways is thanks in part to the collaboration between the film crew and the team at EA. Most film crews or studios take little to no part in a game's development. Sure, they might send over that first draft of the script and maybe some concept art, but that's probably it. The fact that Peter Jackson himself was involved in the development speaks volumes. I mean, how many directors of the Harry Potter films were even aware a game was being made? Also, considering that EA was legally unable to use the book or create things not found in the film, working that close with the production to get that authenticity was the best move. You should definitely give this game a shot if you can find it. Sadly, it's never been re-released on anything but the original consoles that it was made for, but there's cheap copies online, more than worth the price to experience one of the best Lord of the Rings games the franchise ever gave us. So come back next time when the Lord of the Rings review series continues, when we look at the follow-up game, The Return of the King. Thanks for watching.